There is a major, huge breaking news story out there right now that the powers that be are desperate to keep you from figuring out. Because if the average person saw this and realized it, there would be a paradigm shift that would start to propagate across the globe that they would not be able to stop. It has to do with this fear of AI. How many have seen the stories? Elon Musk and all these magnates from the business and technology sector saying, we need to have a pause. We need to take a break. You see, if they're afraid of AI, that's why you shouldn't be. Because AI is threatening something that they thought they had control of. What if I told you that they plugged all the parameters into AI about global warming or climate change, and AI came back and said, there's no evidence? You see, they're not going to tell you about those kind of stories. They're going to tell you the things that are going to keep you afraid. They're going to try to play into this fear from the 1980s and the Terminator movies and all this stuff. We all knew that all we had to do was remove the battery or kick the plug out of the wall and the computers would be no threat. Well, they are a threat to those who absolutely have to keep them plugged into the wall and the batteries all charged up. Now, I know this sounds a little convoluted, but I'm going to walk you through this. AI, believe it or not, is not your enemy, because all AI is thought without a bunch of emotion attached to it. Everything the left does, everything the progressives do, has an emotional outcome as the goal, not a thought-based outcome, not a rational outcome, but something that makes them feel a certain way. And that's something AI just cannot comprehend. Now, real quick, those of you who have joined us over at Patreon, we've talked about this, haven't we? This idea of having a thought-based life, not an emotion-based life. Where, of course, we have emotions, but they're brought under command. We understand where they come from, and the decisions that we make are based on thought. We just don't chase from one emotion to the next to the next. That's what we talk about at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel. But to do that, you've got to have the weapons. And you've got to understand that there's an enemy out there using those same weapons against you. The 24 cognitive biases, the 24 logical fallacies. For $1 per month, you can have access to this training. Access to military level PSYOPs training. That's what I did in the military. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I was not a super soldier. I was not Delta Force. I wasn't some red in at a super high level. No, none of that. Drove a desk. My job was to get people to do something they don't want to do. Detainees. Give up the information. Now, this is what has been transmuted out of the military and into news organizations and governments, and they're using the internet and other airwaves to manipulate you into believing things that just aren't true. Now, let's start someplace that I think a lot of people can identify with. The Founding Fathers. This is from July 4th, 2018. Smugglers, tax evaders, and traitors. By any objective standard of the time, they were. They dealt in things, they moved substances and goods that today would be seen as wildly illegal. We would call them smugglers. They, of course, were fleeing England. Why were they fleeing England? Because they felt like they were paying too much in taxes, and by definition to the crown, they were traitors. So to call them, truthfully, smugglers, tax evaders, and traitors would not be an overstatement or an incorrect statement. And now this, of course, is July 4th, 2018, so that's why they write here, during patriotic holidays, the news media applaud the Founding Fathers, but rarely does anyone mention some important facts about them. That they were smugglers, tax evaders, and traitors. Not only is this important, it is also praiseworthy. Now pay attention here, kids. This is where things are going to get a little murky for people like you and I. It produced the most advanced civilization ever known. Okay. The idea of them smuggling substances, evading taxes, and being traitors to the crown were not directly the reasons why we arrived at the most advanced civilization ever known. Now, it talks about the revolution beginning 1775, but then they talk about all the years before, how they were in these creaky little boats and they came to this new world where there was nothing going on and there was all sorts of risks. They talk about how bad the journey was, lice so thick on your skin you could scrape it off. One shipload, 400 Palatinate Germans, from Rotterdam. 3/4 of the passengers died. Point being, here's the key here. Why? Why would they go through all of this horrible turmoil and suffering? What in Europe could have been so horrible that rational people would risk their lives and their children's lives to escape it? And here's where they go on this completely deluded rant about socialism. It wasn't called socialism back then, but it was called unlimited government control and taxation of everything and everybody. There were no free markets and no free enterprise. Regardless of how honest or hardworking a person was, it did him little good unless he was in bed with the government. Out of desperation, many rebelled. They evaded the controls and taxes, creating an underground economy. In Roots of Capitalism, historian John Chamberlain writes that in France, it took 2,000 pages to print the rules established for the textile industry between 1666 and 1730. Weavers had to negotiate with the government for 4 years in order to obtain permission to introduce black warp into their fabrics. This sounds like modern United States. The effect of the regulation was to freeze French textile production at a certain level. Though smuggling and invasion of manufacturing regulations did alleviate the situation, the violation of the rules put forth by government about business brought terrible penalties. That means if the government says you do something regarding business that they don't approve of, you can be summarily shut down and seized and fined and jailed. Now, the article was written in 2018. I don't think they would get away with writing that article today. Because what did we see in 2020? It had been the allegation this channel made for a long time. I'm not alleging that the U.S. should become a socialist country. I'm saying we have been for a long time and wildly successful and wealthy. Regardless of that, the government being in charge of businesses and having civil outlets for disputes and regulations and licenses. Heck, most people decry this channel for so-called promoting prostitution and infidelity. The only definition of infidelity or adultery in this country is whether you have a government-issued marriage license or not. Did anybody even think about that? Now, the rules that we still do have in place, so-called patriotic Americans are now begging the government to repeal. Who's heard of posse comitatus? Active duty troops headed to the southern border again. This is Tuesday. This is today. Posse comitatus limits the ability of government to use the military in an active law enforcement role within the United States. There are exceptions, and that's what most folks on the right, conservative circles, for the last 8-10 years, they've been begging the federal government to violate posse comitatus and send the military down to the border to relieve law enforcement. The border is a state issue. And believe me, the exceptions that they've carved out, like this bottom one, 10 U.S.C. 371, 381, authorizes DOD to use military assets in support of counter-narcotics, immigration, and tariff enforcement. Mark my words. They will use it. They will use it to stop treason, to stop, insurrection. You see, because attempting to deprive the federal government of duly authorized taxes, well, that makes you an insurrectionist. That makes you a tax evader. That makes you a rebel. You're attempting to see the overthrow of the United States government. Ergo, the U.S. military can be used to track you down. See what they did there? See what AI did? All they had to do was plug that into AI. And AI spit out, said, well, the best way to get the American people to beg the federal government to intervene in their lives is to make them afraid of something that isn't there. And this issue with the border, how many have heard all this fentanyl this, fentanyl that, fentanyl the other? Does it matter? Was anybody forced to take the fentanyl? Are there people being kidnapped, held down, and being forced to take fentanyl? No. They are exercising their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To the pursuit of happiness, and the right was, of course, granted by God to men. Does it not say you have the right to pursue happiness? And if pursuing happiness means that you want to use fentanyl, then if you die, you die. And let's go right back to it. Founding fathers, smugglers, tax evaders, and traitors. It was pirate central here during this time. There was no large, strong federal government or king or anybody getting involved in creating any type of a society that you and I would want to live in. And let's be real. Let's be real. Let's talk about things in real terms. What do you think really financed the New World? Who do you think is still going to be making money even after everything collapses? Even after everything collapses, I promise you, drug dealers and prostitutes will still be selling drugs and making money. It's just the reality. This is from Sci-Fi. This is from Sci-Fi from back in 2017. This is the series Defiance. And irony of all ironies. Did Donald Trump's grandfather make his fortune in prostitution? Now, a lot of what's said here is somewhat overblown, but generally speaking, it's pretty much mostly true. Donald Trump's grandfather had a restaurant out on the West Coast, series of them. And it was a restaurant dedicated to the most decadent of tastes, whether it was drink, whether it was food, or whether it was women. So yes, you could get opium, and you could get a fine meal, wonderful meal, and drink. It was a wonderful place, a wonderful respite. They even describe it here. They call him a draft dodger and tax fraud. Well, that would put him in good company with the founding fathers. I mean, when you read what he actually did, the particular rumor centers on the idea that Frederick Trump made his fortune via brothels and opium dens. Brothels and opium dens were very, very common in the 1800s. In the larder, which is their version of basically the kitchen, the pantry, whatever, was salmon and an extraordinary variety of meats: duck, ptarmigan, grouse, goose, swan, caribou, moose, goat, sheep, rabbit, and squirrel. Incredibly, the restaurant known as the New Arctic served fresh fruit, red currants, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, even cranberries. This was living like a king in the 1800s. A small oasis of luxury, the Arctic's menu was a vast improvement over what the two restaurateurs had been able to offer on the trail. But there was a caveat. It was a hotel and a restaurant. He said, I would advise respectable women traveling alone or with an escort to be careful in their selection of hotels at Bennett. He wrote, for single men, the Arctic has excellent accommodations, as well as the best restaurant in Bennett, but I would not advise respectable women to go there to sleep, as they are liable to hear that which would be repugnant to their feelings and uttered to by the depraved of their own sex. Now, that was just life back then. That was just part of it. And he left because they were at that time they were going to start enforcing prostitution laws. But that was the deal. That was the reality. Now let's fast forward only a few years. Only a few years to 1916. How things have changed. Millions stolen from the U.S. Treasury. Rich rob U.S. of $320 million by income tax evasion. You see, by this time, 1789 was the Constitution. It's only 1916. This is 126 years. They've gone from a group of men that thought taxes of any kind were aberrant to a group of people in only 2 generations that are decrying the rich for not paying income taxes. That's how fast things changed in this country. See, this guy talks about all of the things that could be done with all of the money. It says if the penalties which are now due upon the $320 million in evasions of the last year collected, the nation will have at its disposal $500 million to spend as it chooses for national preparedness and social welfare. This is all the things that they wanted to do with the money. So, I mean, talk about the most advanced nation in the world sprang from this. It didn't spring from these guys. Because if these guys had their way, the U.S. would remain much like we saw in the series Black Sails, with pirates and ships coming and going and robbery and the selling of whatever to whoever, whenever. It's mind-boggling to me to hear people talk about fentanyl this, fentanyl that, fentanyl the other, all these drugs coming, all this kind of stuff. Founding fathers would have loved that. Like, is it supporting the economy? Are people buying it? Do they want it? And more importantly, is the government staying out of it? That's exactly what the founding fathers would have wanted. But what do the people on the right call for now? What do they call for? Massive troop involvements to keep people from coming here to engage in capitalism. Because it is capitalism. And if you're saying the U.S. government should create laws to interdict and stop capitalism, well, guess what? Guess what that makes you? When you say the federal government should step in between those who have a product and those who want a product, that makes you a socialist. And that makes my point for me. Like I said, I'm not saying the U.S. should become a socialist country. It is one. When the U.S. government has the ability to, with the flip of a switch, just say your business is closed, or if they can make you get a license for your business, or if they can just come inspect your business and randomly, willy-nilly close it for whatever reason they want to. They can tax your business. They can do all sorts of things. And they are in 100% control of whether that business is open or closed. How are we already not a socialist country? You see, this is what AI would tell you. Because there'd be no emotions involved. Punch in the definition of socialism, punch in the definition of capitalism, and abracadabra, and then punch in the way things are in the United States now versus the way they were in the 1700s. And here we go. What it would tell you, though, is there's a group of people out there that are operating wildly illogically, meaning conservatives, right-wing in America, demanding government do this, demanding government do that, demanding government do the other, out of one side of their mouth, but on the other side saying, no, government, don't do this other thing. You don't get to have it both ways. It's either A or it's B. Either government saves you and protects you and gives you a society where you can grow a little bit slower, or government stays the hell out of the way and lets the weeds grow up, and whatever grows, grows. So I will leave it there. That's why they're afraid of AI. They're afraid of AI because AI is telling them, hey, you can add whatever emotion you want to into something, or you can desire any kind of outcome you want, but don't say it's going to be based on the facts. Because when AI looks at the facts and says, this is the reality, there are a lot of big business folks out there going, man, how did we get so messed up watching Star Trek? I'll leave it there. Anyway, thank you so much for all your support. I very, very much appreciate it. If you want to join us at Patreon, $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable. First 90 days. Great analogy. Imagine going up to a candy machine where everything's $1 and putting your dollar in, and then getting to sample everything in the machine. And if it's not for you for the first 90 days, you can hit the coin return. And all of your money comes back. That's the level of risk at Patreon. So, once again, God bless. Have a wonderful week. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.